So the session today is about co-ops, the Swiss Army knife of community economies, brought to you by the Canadian CED Network, a national network of local organizations and individuals working to create local economic opportunities that support an inclusive and sustainable economy. If you like the session today, consider becoming a member or signing up for our free e-newsletters. We'll provide more information on that later on. This session is part of a new national webinar series that's launching that will offer monthly sessions for the next year on topics such as community resiliency, financial management of CED organizations, charitable status for CED, and others. But it also builds on the long experience of CCEDNet's International Committee, which has organized previous sessions on community forestry in BC and Nepal, the co-construction of public policy for the social and solidarity economy in Mali and around the world, the impacts of fair trade, or successful strategies for community tourism. All of these past sessions are available on our website, and we'll provide links to them in a follow-up email. The session's also made possible with the support of Uniterra, one of the biggest Canadian international volunteer cooperation programs that helps reduce poverty and inequalities in 12 countries across Africa, Latin America, and Asia. Uniterra supports organizations in developing countries that work to improve living conditions in their communities. So to find out more about Uniterra or their cooperation programs, visit uniterra.ca. The session is going to be divided into two parts. The first part includes 3 discussions with Gretchen, Jason, and Sherry. Those conversations will last about 30 minutes, and then there will be about 25 minutes for a question and answer period. So what do we mean when we say co-ops are the Swiss Army knife of community economies? When our international committee decided to do a webinar highlighting the contributions of co-ops to improving people's lives around the world, the examples that were suggested were so diverse, we were amazed at the versatility of the co-op model, even for those of us who are familiar with what co-ops are doing across Canada and around the world. You can really use it for just about any occasion. There are even co-op wineries that you can put that Swiss Army knife corkscrew to good use. We wanted to get a bit of a sense of how familiar people on the session today are with co-ops. So here's a quick little poll everyone should be able to answer. How many co-ops are you a member of? This could be everything from mountain equipment co-op to a local co-op bookstore, a grocery store, natural food store, federated co-ops, for example, for gas or other supplies. There are tons that are out there. So maybe you're a member of at least one co-op you can think of, maybe several. We just wanted to get a quick idea. If we have lots of co-op experts on the call or some people who are new to the topic. And it sounds like we have a few people who are at least, the vast majority, at least one co-op, and a quarter of participants actually now that are more than they've counted recently. So there are a few co-op enthusiasts on the call. Terrific. Good. So this is the International Year of Cooperatives, and there are many celebrations because there's much to celebrate. Around the world, co-ops are really making a major difference in people's lives. And today we have 3 remarkable examples of how that's happening. So I'm going to hide this poll, and we'll go back to the presentation. And our first discussion today is with Gretchen Hernandez.
Good morning.
Morning, Gretchen.
Well, hi.
Great.
This is really exciting. So many people.
Yes, it's a very good turnout. So we're going to start with a look at the Tomina Oregano Cooperative in Bolivia. Gretchen is a PhD candidate in geography and a researcher with the Center for Sustainable Community Development at Simon Fraser University. Her areas of research include indigenous entrepreneurship, community development, new social and economic models in Latin America. She is a coordinator of the Bolivian Specialization in CED project. She holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Concordia University and a master's in community and regional planning from UBC. She also worked previously as an instructor in the Latin American Management Program at Capilano University as a cooperant for economic development projects in Bolivia. So thanks for joining us, Gretchen.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here, and it's kind of a long intro about me, but it should give people a sense that I work a lot in Latin America in CED and cooperatives.
Yes. Can you start out, I guess, by telling us a bit about Bolivia and the context of the co-op?
Sure. So Bolivia basically, just for people who always ask me, it's right in the heart of South America. It's bordered by 5 countries, so one of its biggest challenges is no sea access, so no ports. And basically it's a periphery economy, really poor. Even now when the whole GDP has gone up, that hasn't changed the poverty levels for most people. And the other really fascinating thing about Bolivia is that the majority of people identify as indigenous. It's still highly rural as well. That's it. And I don't have access. I don't seem to have access to changing my slides. So.
Oh, you're right.
Anyway, these are just some pictures of, just to show you a bit of the diversity geographically and in terms of the population in Bolivia, just to give you a sense that it's both urban and rural, that you have, academic types and people living fairly traditional lives. It's quite a mix.
See if you can change them now, Gretchen.
Pardon me? Yes, I can change my slides now, yes.
Okay. And so this is where the Oregano Co-op was founded?
Yeah, this is a picture from Google Earth just to show that Tomina it's in the highlands, fairly high still, 2,500 meters above sea level, but it's in a valley area of that region. It's near Sucre, which is the nominal capital of Bolivia, and it's in the center of the country. Go ahead.
Yeah, so what was the situation that prompted the creation of the co-op?
Well, the co-op actually already existed since the 50s because in that time with socialist governments, they actually sort of created co-ops top-down from the government, very different than how they developed in Canada as grassroots movements. And so it had been essentially imposed at that time and was essentially inactive when a Canadian NGO called CCEDNet-RCDÉC, based in Quebec, and actually actually founded by and run by Association of Cooperatives. Basically, CCEDNet-RCDÉC came in and helped to revitalize that co-op by bringing in a new crop, oregano, and a new market. And this place before the co-op, one of the things that's really important to highlight is that the land lots that people own there are too small for agricultural activity. There was land reform there in the 50s, so people have, at this point, sort of 1 or 2 hectares of land. They can just barely eat, but they have no cash income. There's no irrigation systems hardly at all. So basically, there was a high level of migration to cities for seasonal work or permanently to other countries. There was no stores. There was no commerce in the town at the time when the co-op was revitalized.
Roughly what year did CCEDNet-RCDÉC begin that work?
It's 10 years ago now.
10 years now. So since then, what's the co-op been able to achieve? How has it developed?
Well, it's quite remarkable. It now has more than 1,000 members, not just in Tomina, but in the larger region as well. The existing agricultural co-op, what they did have is they owned land. So now they co-own the land that the social enterprise is on. That actually you can see this picture here is of an actual oregano crop in a farmer's field. What's amazing about the oregano is that it only uses 10% of the land for production, leaving 90% available for food production. And then the people are still able to earn enough money that's worth their while. The co-op, what they do is they provide the seedlings and fertilizer on credit with no interest, which is really important because people don't make enough money to pay interest, right? That's the difference with microcredit. This is much more a solidarity economy rather than sort of a market economy to help poorer people, and I think that it works much more effectively. And with the kind of income that people have, and the more people that have moved back to town, the co-op has also opened a grocery store in town. It's important to mention that the co-op is partnered essentially with this social enterprise that was started by the NGO. But the social enterprise is on land owned by the co-op, and it's co-owned by the NGO and the co-op. They do the cultivation of the seedlings. They find markets. This oregano is really, really high quality because it was developed based on 5 years of research done by this NGO in conjunction with community members. And it's actually considered the highest quality oregano in South America. So for the Brazilian food market, this oregano is used in soup production, basically, in the packaged soups, you know, Knorr and Maggi, these brands that are very popular in Latin America. They are able to sell all of their crop to one company, and that company has room for much, much more of the oregano. So the social enterprise is partnered in that. They also invent new technologies, like you can see in this picture here. This man is in front of his drying shed. Originally, they were using drying sheds invented in other countries that use electricity to dry the oregano. But this way, this is made of adobe with just a plastic roof and wire mesh shelves, and the people are now able to dry the oregano on their own farm, and thereby decreasing, you know, the risk of it being damaged in transportation to be sold in town. So basically, what's amazing to me about this example is that the individual farmer or members earn $50 for each crop, and they have 3 crops a year, so about $150 a year. And they are thrilled with $150 a year. Like, that's, I think, so hard to imagine for people in Canada, but it makes all the difference. This man here moved back to his farm because of this co-op, and that's very common. He says he has enough food enough money now to keep his kids, send his kids to high school in the nearby town. And the town now has a hotel that's open. I mean, it's not crazy busy. It has about 10 rooms, but it's definitely viable. 2 restaurants and multiple shops. And the municipality is partnering in with the NGO to help build all kinds of infrastructure now in the rural areas, such as irrigation.
Wow.
So it's quite transformative.
I was going to say, you've been involved with this for a while, and both in terms of support and study. What have you learned some lessons from Tomina's experience?
Yeah, and I want to really give credit for a lot of this information to SOCODEVI. This is me as a researcher researching this, but of course the people at SOCODEVI would know this project, you know, inside out, especially those who work actually in Bolivia. But my thoughts on it essentially is that one of the big things that made a success here is the research done by the NGO. They actually did, you know, 5 years of scientific research on what crop would grow in that region and would be marketable, and to develop a really high quality crop. They actually brought in the oregano from Turkey. I know that doesn't sound sustainable and ecological, but it actually is okay in that context because it is a farmed product. It's not, you know, invading any local systems or anything. But it's this research that was done that created this really viable product, and this focus on maintaining food security so that people don't need to grow, you know, before they would grow like potatoes, but it would take up their entire farm and they just make a few pennies, right? So the oregano research is the key. And I think that the social enterprise being separate from the co-op allows the co-op to actually focus, you know, directly on members' needs, the store, the fertilizer, the credit, you know, making things better for their members, focusing on the town, irrigation, you know, those kinds of things. Whereas if they had to focus purely on, you know, marketing and processing, all their time and attention would be eaten up with that, and there might be more infighting. So it kind of professionalizes the marketing and all of that from community members. Although community members do also work in the social enterprise, I should mention, and essentially the co-op has really revitalized the community.
So it's an amazing impact. Where's the co-op? What are the next steps for the co-op from here?
Well, they're planning to expand from 1,000 members to 4,000. Actually, when I saw them last year, they were already close to 1,500, and they do have some Canadian government funding to be able to do that because they have to do a lot of training and you know, those kinds of things. And right now, the social enterprise is at 65% cost recovery, so they have a plan to move that to 100%, and part of that will be from having more families involved and less training to do. And they're also starting to introduce diversification, economic diversification. They're looking at other crops. They're looking at chicken farms. I think they're doing a pilot chicken farm right now because currently, if you can believe it, chicken consumed in the nearby city are brought from across the country, so they would like to fill that market. And of course, they have a lot of infrastructure issues to deal with. This is a very, very rural, very poor area.
Wow. Well, that's it's an amazing progress just in the last 10 years, as you say, and it sounds like they've got big plans for the future. So thanks for that, Gretchen.
Thank you very much.
Let's keep going now. If people have questions, you can post them in the chat room. There I see Don's got one already that we'll come back to. But we'll move on with our second discussion now. Jason Ferteon, who's going to talk about a partnership between the Canadian Co-op Association and the National Federation of Cooperatives for Persons with Disabilities in the Philippines. Jason worked as the Business Development Officer on behalf of the Canadian Co-op Association at the NFCPWD in the Philippines. I can say that acronym because I work for an organization called the CCEDNet-RCDÉC out of practice. The Canadian Co-op Associations partnered with the NFCPWD since 2005 when it helped them to negotiate and manage their largest production contract to date. In recent years, the Federation has identified business development as a priority issue to broaden employment to more disabled people. CCA is providing technical and financial supports to strengthen the Federation's ability to identify, evaluate, plan for, and implement new business ideas in partnership with its co-op members. So welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much, Mike. Good to be here.
Great. So this project was designed to create opportunities for people with disabilities in the Philippines. What's life like for them on a daily basis?
Sorry, it looks like we seem to have gone all the way back to the beginning. Give me one moment here. Beauty. Yeah, sorry about that. So life for persons with disabilities, or PWDs, in the Philippines can actually be quite difficult. They're among the most marginalized of groups. And so when you have a country like the Philippines with almost 100 million people, they're very much a net exporter of labor. So you have people going to places like Singapore, Dubai, even Canada to find employment, because it has underemployment of about 20%. And so in this market where employers have their choice of the cream of the crop, regularly you don't have PWDs finding meaningful employment. And this is compounded by their difficulties with physical barriers, certain negative perceptions that come along with being disabled, as well as typically low levels of education and formal work experience. And so it was within this context that within the Philippines in the late 90s that a variety of charitable organizations actually came together and formed what they called sheltered workshops. And these were used essentially to try and build the skills of persons with disabilities so that they would then be able to enter the workforce later on in their life. And so during these workshops, they were guaranteed a certain wage, as well as they would learn skills like making handicrafts, garments, and different furniture. And then during this time, they actually would procure small contracts with the Department of Education there, where they would produce chairs like you see in the picture right there. Now, the whole idea of this was, though, purely just to build up their skills before entering the workforce. And so workers were expected to transition out once they were either of a certain age or they had gained enough experience.
And so how did the National Federation of Cooperatives for People with Disabilities come about?
Yeah, so out of that was sort of the birth of the NFCPWD. So what we had was sheltered workshops actually began to close. And so you had a whole bunch of graduates that were seeking collective employment. They didn't see any reason why that they shouldn't stop working together as a collective unit. And so that led to the birth of 5 co-ops purely with persons with disabilities, owned and run by all of them. Along with this came a certain amount of policy support for these cooperatives. So there was in the Philippines the General Appropriations Act, which essentially just mandated that all public agencies give 1% of their overall budgets to PWD co-ops. Now, obviously, this hasn't been implemented among all of them. Some follow it, some don't. It's more of just a mandate. But the Department of Education has been very good for the NFCPWD as they made the strongest commitment. Currently, they guarantee 10% of their desk chairs they're purchasing to PWD co-ops, and then another 10% to just cooperatives in general. And so out of this, you saw the need for a federation that sort of was an umbrella for all of the PWD co-ops, just in terms of advocacy to further push the General Appropriations Act, as well as procure the contracts from the Department of Education the Philippines is over 7,000 islands, so it can be a bit of a logistical nightmare in regards to who does what schools. So contract procurement and distribution came into the needs to form a federation.
That's amazing, the importance and the role that policy can play in supporting that. So what have the co-ops been able to do for people with disabilities?
The co-ops have been absolutely fantastic for PWDs there. So you have, essentially it's been able to provide them for meaningful employment. That was originally the entire rationale of being able to provide jobs for persons with disabilities in the Philippines. But on top of that, they've been able to get so much more. So there's been, again, the personal development that you would have seen in the sheltered workshops continuing on. There's a certain amount of self-esteem that comes with it, that they're now contributing members to society, and it gives them a certain amount of dignity as now influential economic actors. On top of that, they're not just there to say, okay, this is my job, this is what I work. We also try to empower them, and so the NFCPWD holds regular trainings and seminars to say, this is what a cooperative is, this is what we're trying to provide you, and really educate them as to how they're the owners, not just the workers. And then on top of that, it's also provide them with a way to be competitive in the Philippines economy, because they're contributing, they're participating in like these very complex bidding wars, contracts with complex orders, and all these things that a regular business would face. It's no longer just donor organizations giving them a handout. They're now competing with the rest of the Philippines. And so it's a competitive enterprise, very much so, while still being founded in the social values of a cooperative.
So it sounds like it's been quite a transformation. Have there been, what have been some of the key factors in the co-op being able to make that shift?
Well, one of the big factors I would mention for sure is they had very, very strong leadership right from the get-go, and so those strong leaders are what pushed everything forward. And then since then, a lot of their partnerships as well have helped them along the way. So those partnerships being with the Christian Blind Mission, Land Bank for financing, and then in particular the CCA came in. The Federation was formed in 1998. The CCA came in 2005, essentially to help out with whatever it can, and that's along the lines of cooperative development, helping them prepare for the bidding process, streamlining their production processes and trying to make them as efficient as possible, along with governance and leadership training. Specifically, in recent years, there's been extra money put aside for gender sensitivity training to empower women PWDs as well. Health and safety training just to make it a little bit more legitimate. And then as well, where I came in on the other end was more business development assistance. So aiding with their current operations while trying to look outwards and to see where they can develop.
Those are some very interesting key points there, and I think we see them come back in other contexts as well. So what are the next steps for the Federation in terms of its development?
Yeah, well, moving forward, my main focus for my 6-month internship there was actually diversifying. So like I mentioned, their main business was creating school furniture for the Department of Education. Now that has served them well over the years, but overall what we've seen is an emergence of a need for a new business, more diversification, because having this one major customer has created them a very large amount of dependency on the Department of Education. And so whenever things like input prices fluctuate, so the cost of wood or steel fluctuate, it hits the cooperatives very hard. When order quantities fluctuate, it hits the cooperatives very hard. If the Department of Education doesn't need many chairs one year, then that really hits the members very hard at home. And then on top of that, sometimes the Department of Education takes a little bit longer to settle their account. And so you see a variety of problems when you just depend on one customer with one product, and that's why they've looked at diversifying outwards. Specifically, the business line that I looked into diversifying into was organic fertilizer. Recently in 2010, they passed the Organic Agriculture Act in the Philippines, which essentially is just mandates their concerted effort towards moving away from chemical fertilizers and inorganic farming to more organic farming practices as sort of an environmental initiative. Producing the organic fertilizer to help that initiative was pilot tested at one cooperative in particular, and that's Lingkod Banahao in Candelaria, Quezon, and that's where I was stationed for 6 months. Just to go forward on that, the organic fertilizer is the future for them, and so I was really happy with what I was able to see there. It's a relatively simple production process that PWDs, it's a great business line for them, as literally it's just taking organic waste from the market, so that's a collection from the market. You compost it over time, you feed it to the worm, the African nightcrawler. The worm digests the organic waste, and that turns into very high quality organic fertilizer. So again, we see partnerships being really, really important in the business lines of these cooperatives, is that they need to secure organic waste collection with the local government unit, as well get basic training in worm cultivation and care from places like the Department of Agriculture. And overall, what we're going to see, hopefully, from this organic fertilizer line is it's forecasted to make $1.3 million in sales at full implementation. And the most beautiful thing about this is over 85% of that goes directly back to the members. There's very, very little costs that are lost. So 60% is returned through wages, and then there's another 25% profit margin to be returned to over 350 persons with disabilities across the Philippines. And then just a few of the obstacles that they're obviously going to face with that is it does take substantial capital investment. That's why the returns are so high, is because the initial capital investment is very high as well. And keys that they've come across over the past couple of years with that is, one, partnering with the Department of Agriculture. They actually sponsored the pilot project to see the results. And so they're looking to further that relationship with them, not only for training, but also for access to farmers. Now, reaching the market of rural farmers in the Philippines can also be very difficult because they've sort of grown up doing farming the one way. Their great-great-grandfather did it this way, their great-grandfather, and so on and so forth. And so trying to move them into more of an organic approach to farming can be quite difficult. And that's why we planned a highly engaging approach, which is to sponsor the training of farmers in organic practices, and then develop those farmers into sort of leaders in their community who can then help everyone else around them with organic farming. And so it's a really, really cool sustainable initiative that's hopefully going to help persons with disabilities and at the same time contribute to the environmental sustainability of the Philippines.
Excellent.
Yeah, and then I guess the last thing to talk about is the future plans with the project. So it's been already piloted at one, and it's now in the full implementation stage. The NFCPWD's goal is to have 77 cooperatives. That's one in each province across the Philippines. And to replicate this business line in any cooperative that's able to do it. And so along with that comes a technical assistance package that I helped develop. And then hopefully what we have is I trained people there, and then they train more people in cooperatives and sort of work off each other as an entire network of cooperatives, building upon all the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they accumulate together. Again, like I always say, it's very, very important that they work with their partners. So that's the Department of Agriculture, the local government unit, financiers, and things like that. And then one other last little thing to note is it was actually very interesting. One other possibility came up while I was there, and that was sort of along integrating the supply chain. And so we said, okay, we're making organic fertilizer. Next step, obviously, in the supply chain is the actual organic farming. And so you can see a picture in the bottom right there. That's myself and the chair of the board meeting with the head of the Mangyan tribe in Oriental Mindoro. And so they have, among other marginalized groups in the Philippines, the Mangyan tribe are also very marginalized. And it's so very, very interesting to see the possibility of a joint venture between the Mangyan tribe supplying land and labor, and then PWDs would actually go in and supply the management and the expertise with respect to organic farming. And so you have a very, very interesting joint venture there where you have the marginalized helping the marginalized moving up together. So that was a very interesting project that looks like it will also be going through.
Remarkable. That's very interesting. Well, thanks so much for that, Jason. I think there's one more slide here with your contact information that we'll post again at the end of the presentation with you, as well as Derek Cameron at the Canadian Co-op Association for people that want more information.
Sure thing.
Thanks for that. We'll move on now to our final presentation. Our third discussion is with Sherry Hennessy, who is with Arctic Co-ops. Sherry joined Arctic Co-ops in February 2004 as department manager and established a centralized training department for the co-op system. The department's primary responsibility is to provide guidance and support to the 31 community-owned co-ops operating in Canada's Arctic with respect to developing and implementing training initiatives for their employees. Earlier this year, the training department was successful in securing $3.7 million from Human Resources and Skills Development Canada for Arctic Co-op's new strategy for training Arctic technicians. This 3-year strategy will expand the training opportunities for co-op employees into all areas of the diverse co-op operation. Sherry is a band member of the Pine Creek First Nation. Thank you for joining us, Sherry.
Thank you.
So to start, I guess, can you tell us a bit about Arctic co-ops?
This map here, it shows the Arctic regions of Canada, particularly Northwest Territories and Nunavut. And it is in these 2 territories where our 31 member co-ops are located and operate.
And it sounds like there's been a long history of development for the co-op.
It has been. The co-ops first started establishing about 50 years ago, a little over 50 years ago. And sorry, I think I did go. There we go. So this part of Canada where the northern co-ops operate has a very rich history and culture. Aboriginal people have lived in the Arctic for thousands of years. About 60 years ago, things began to change very quickly for the Inuit, Dene, and Métis people of the Arctic. With the end of the World War II and the Cold War in the 50s and 60s, Arctic sovereignty and North American defense became important global issues. On the defense side of the equation, plans were developed by the United States to establish an advanced warning capability across the Arctic. This was called the Distance Early Warning, or the DEW line, which is a series of 63 radar and communication installations stretching about 3,000 miles from Alaska to across the Canadian Arctic to the eastern shores of Baffin Island. And it was built just north of the Arctic Circle. So in response to the questions of sovereignty, Canada began to show interest in the Arctic. Government encouraged the creation of permanent settlements, and people who had lived a nomadic lifestyle for many years were encouraged to move to these new settlements. Several people were relocated to the high Arctic communities of Resolute Bay and Grise Fjord to demonstrate Canada's presence and sovereignty in the north. A typical new community, very limited services, may have included a trading post, a religious mission, and depending on the size of the community, perhaps an RCMP detachment or possibly some type of health service or government administrative office. So as the communities developed, so did local co-ops. Initially, the activities carried out by the new residents of these settlements were not organized as a co-op or any other type of business or organization. Instead, it was based on survival. People decided what had to be done, and they did it together. Often people were not satisfied that they were being treated fairly in their exchange with the other traders. So as a result, they began to look at other options to sell their furs and acquire other goods. The solution was to deal directly with the fur auction houses in southern Canada. This was not a simple undertaking, though, as transportation was irregular at best. Communications with the south was almost non-existent, and the experience of selling furs in the south was limited. Gradually, these activities became the foundation for formal business, and with the support of the missionaries or government employees, community residents considered different options to organize their economic activities. It was clear that a cooperative model was an ideal fit for the traditional values and way of life of the Inuit and Dene people in the north. So you can see that there's different styles of buildings that had been erected. On the right are pictures from Northwest Territories, and they could build log cabins with the existence of trees. However, on the right, Nunavut doesn't have any trees, so their building style was really quite different. Local cooperatives were the first to provide municipal services such as water delivery and sewage removal to many of the communities. Some co-ops were contracted by the government to manage the fuel delivery operations in the community, while others established commercial fishery operations in order to process the Arctic char and sell it in the south. Later, cooperatives developed retail services to meet the consumer needs of the co-op member owners. These early retail activities operated from whatever facility was available in the community. Was often a retail facility was located in a discarded or abandoned building that was adapted as a makeshift store or warehouse.
So today, this 50 years later or so, the co-ops have clearly grown.
They have, over the past 50 years, the co-op system in the Arctic has grown significantly. So today we find ourselves with 31 member co-ops with approximately 22,000 member owners. Our system employs over 900 people, making it the largest private sector employer of Aboriginal people in the North. And the co-ops have paid out over $28 million in wages and payment to local artists. As you can see, the people in the Arctic have utilized the co-op model to the fullest. Our 2011 financial results are really quite impressive for these 31 remotely located operations. And as you can see, in 2011, the co-op system had a revenue of almost $197 million with assets of almost $175 million.
That is an amazing presence across the Arctic.
Yes, it certainly is. So today our member co-ops are multi-purpose business operations that provide a wide range of services to their communities. Services include, they all have a retail store. Many of them have a full-service hotel. They provide cable television service to their community, fuel distribution, art marketing. Some have ventured into property rentals, construction. And so these are just a few of our facilities that are located throughout the Arctic. The co-ops carry a large range of day-to-day merchandise, from food and clothing all the way to furniture and vehicles for the residents. The co-ops not only provide merchandise to the residents, but they also work closely with the government of Nunavut to preserve and protect Inuit languages. You'll notice that the signs have all been translated in the stores located in Nunavut. The co-ops are also committed to providing consumers with healthy food choices.
Which isn't easy in those remote locations.
It isn't. It can be very difficult to get perishable foods into the north while they're still eatable. The co-ops are licensed vendors to sell snowmobiles, ATVs, and outboard motors, so people can move around the land freely. In most communities, the supply and distribution of gasoline, home heating fuel, and aircraft fuel is owned, controlled, and regulated by the government. Co-ops are contracted to operate and manage the fuel distribution services in 21 of our isolated communities, which can also include the refueling of aircraft that comes in and out of the community. Many co-ops provide the cable TV service in their communities, and for those employees, along with mechanical technicians and other employees, we provide a great deal of training so that they can learn the skills in those fields. So in addition to operating a retail store, a hotel, cable TV service, and fuel distribution, many of the co-ops have undertaken other business operations.
Including a post office. I'm not sure there are many co-op post offices across the country.
there are still some co-ops in the Arctic that are operating a post office, yes.
Right. So clearly the co-ops have a huge impact on daily life. As big as Arctic co-ops is now, what kind of challenges or barriers are you facing at their further development?
One of the areas where co-ops in the north have great challenges in transportation. There are very few roads in the north, and consequently we rely on air and sea transport to deliver most product. As a system that delivers merchandise and many other goods to the most remote one-third part of our country, it is impossible for us to meet the needs of our members on our own. Most of our communities are not accessible by road. As a result, everything that is shipped into the north is shipped by air, sea, or winter road. For our member co-ops that cannot be accessed by road, about 70% of their product Arctic co-op supplies to our member co-ops is shipped by air. Air transport is scheduled by charter and schedule service, and we use a wide range of aircraft. Other examples of how co-ops are resupplied with their product, which can sometimes only be once a year, is by winter road in the western Arctic, by barge on the Mackenzie River and in the Beaufort Sea area, and by ships for most other regions in the Arctic. On behalf of our member co-ops, Arctic Co-op coordinates the logistics and transportation of all merchandise and other goods shipped to the north. So to ensure consistent and stable transportation services, the co-op system entered into a partnership with a sea transportation company out of Quebec. This company, Nunavut Sea Link and Supply, is majority owned by the co-ops in the Arctic. Through this company, we lease large capacity, heavy lift, ice-class ships to transport essential retail merchandise, building materials, vehicles, or anything else needed in the north, and this is done during a short shipping season during the summer. In 2008, NSSI, as we call them, was the first company to resupply the Central Arctic or Kitikmeot region of Nunavut. So the top left-hand picture shows how the ships, they sail from Montreal all the way up to Resolute Bay in the high Arctic. Then they go south to the communities in the Kitikmeot region. Then they go back north and around the north coast of the Baffin Island on their way back to Montreal.
Sorry, you were going to finish up with this.
These are just some or more pictures of our resupply by sea, is what we call it. And then you'll just notice how like they are big freighters. And so the bottom picture shows a tugboat towing a littering barge, it's called, to shore. And they have to, this is how they transport a lot of the product from the big freighter to land.
A huge logistical operation. What areas has the Arctic co-ops identified for growth and development from here?
The co-ops in the Arctic have made great progress over the years since the first locally owned and controlled co-op was incorporated in 1959 in Cape Dorset, Nunavut. We are fortunate to have had hardworking and forward-thinking owners and leaders that were committed to working together to build their communities and their people. Today, the community-based co-ops in the Arctic are an essential part of the fabric of their communities. Co-ops have developed a wide range of services. However, balancing the realities of operating successful businesses with the co-op's commitment to operate in a socially responsible manner, developing their co-op members, leaders, and employees, and building our communities has been quite a challenge. The co-ops continuously look ahead and plan how to improve services to their member owners. With 3 co-ops having opened new facilities since May 2011, it's anticipated that the co-op model will continue to operate very successfully in Canada's Arctic. Thank you very much.
Yes, if history is any indication, I'm sure it will. Thank you, Sherry, for that. very impressive presentation, and from all three of our presenters. Now it's the official. We have about 10 minutes left for questions and answers. I see there's already been lots of questions and answering going on in the chat box in the bottom right of the corner, and I'm not sure if any of our presenters, Jason or Gretchen in particular, might have some comments or answers that you'd want to add. I guess some of the questions are a bit, can be complicated to type out answers to. Is there anything that's been asked to date, Gretchen or Jason, that you'd want to speak a bit to?
Well, I think I just finished typing out the answer to, I believe it was Glenn. He just had some questions about specifically how the PWD co-ops function with respect to full-time or part-time and what their wage rates are like. Just to address minimum wages, when I was in the Philippines, yeah, they're paid based on piece rate because it's very hard to guarantee a certain wage or minimum wage, if you will, to the PWDs, as, again, like I mentioned, they're very dependent on the one customer, that's the Department of Education. And so when those order quantities fluctuate in a negative direction, if they're in a positive direction, great, but if they're in a negative direction, it can hit the cooperatives quite hard, and they can't necessarily guarantee wages throughout the year, which is specifically why right now they're looking at the future, and they're planning really hard as to how they're going to diversify their lines. With respect to minimum wages, even throughout the towns that I was in, there would be certain minimum wages for those regions. But after speaking to people, the government will set a minimum wage, but regularly that's not even followed, as a lot of it is obviously under the table transactions. And there's like a huge supply of labor. So it's an employer's market, and they definitely run the show.
Yeah, that's a challenge in any country.
I would just like to, oh, sorry, were you done, Jason?
No, yeah, go ahead.
And I was just, before you go, Gretchen, I should also say to everyone that Lynn Markel is on the webinar. I think she introduced herself in the chat room earlier. Are you on the phone as well, Lynn?
Yes, I am.
Thanks, great. So Lynn is manager of co-op development at the Canadian Co-op Association, so she is able to help with any questions, more general questions people might have with around support for co-op development in Canada if they're aspiring co-op developers with us today. But so sorry to interrupt, Gretchen, if you just want to get back.
No, I just wanted to sort of mention a couple things that perhaps or came up in the questions and that I've thought of. One is the really importance of cooperatives helping cooperative development, right? And as the CCA does. This co-op in Bolivia would not be doing what it's doing if it weren't for these Quebec agricultural cooperatives who got together and decided to spend money and reach out, right, to a place like Bolivia. And this is actually, I think, an Andean initiative, so they're doing the same thing in Peru as well, I mean, similar. Also, regarding the crop of oregano, I know that it goes against ideas of sustainable and local to have a crop from somewhere else, but the thing that really, and I felt the same way in my first reaction, but the thing that I realized is that the local crops all take a huge amount of land to grow, compared to oregano in terms of the money you can get for it. So there's this, what I love about the oregano crop is that it allows people to have a cash income while still having 90% of their land for food production because they rely on that as their food supply. I mean, they only eat a couple times a day and very, limited a variety in amounts compared to what we eat, but they can, it's enough, right? And so that is something sort of interesting. And also, I think it's important to mention that the social enterprise, although it sort of maybe seems like, they're controlling the show, really what I see them as doing is they're like the old grain companies, right? So, or grain, the grain operators. Like what happens is, the grain processing is what I'm trying to say in Saskatchewan. So what happens is the farmers come and they essentially drop off their oregano at the social enterprise and they get a little chit and they go over to the co-op office and the co-op pays them out their money, minus, of course, their original seedling supplies. And and so I guess they call that a producer co-op, right? And then the social enterprise, what they do is the processing and the marketing of the product. So because it's like they had to fill in so many gaps in the supply chain because in the production chain, because there is like no local buyer, no local factory, no local processing, no local transportation of any kind. So they had to sort of fill in all the gaps with this project, and that's why the social enterprise is involved, and it's not being done all by the co-op, but the co-op is getting stronger and stronger, and I think taking on more and more decision making within the project. That's what I wanted to say.
Sherry, it's Lynn Markle here. I'm very interested in terms of replication about the issue of having a co-op, a producer co-op, and then another organization which you're calling a social enterprise. I'm interested in the concept of the two working together and why the two were formed at the same time, because often we have co-ops taking on that role of the processing and the marketing.
Yes, that's right.
We're sure the farmers had the capacity to do all of that, and what's your suggestion of this being done in Canada in terms of a similar situation with a new group of people forming and having to learn a lot about a new crop and so on, and then the idea. So who actually runs the social enterprise and how did that get formed?
The social enterprise is co-run, co-managed by the co-op and the NGO, so CODEVI.
Okay.
And the co-op was started previously, but was not really doing very much, right? So just to mention, they weren't created at the same time. The co-op, I think, was the way to get local people involved in what was essentially an NGO project to start with, using the co-op institution, if you will, that was existing there and getting more people into it. But every situation is going to be a little bit different. So I'm not completely enthralled by the idea of replicability because it really depends on the context and the social, capital that exists there and the context in many ways. So I think that in this case, yes, that is exactly right. They didn't think that local people had the business expertise to run a business really at that time or do the processing, and so it's been a step-by-step process. I mean, first it was external people who ran the processing plant and ran the greenhouses and ran the company. Now, over time, right, local people now run the greenhouse as employees. A local person runs the processing part, a local person runs the oil production part, and still only the business itself is still managed by an external person because they don't have anyone, locally who, for example, has a business background. But I think they're not, but they would like it to move in that direction. I mean, the NGO doesn't want to be there forever. They want to turn it all over to local people sort of over, I think, about a 20-year process. I think that, I don't want to be, it's not to be patronizing, but I think they were right. And the thing is that what this setup allowed people to do is focus on the co-op in a way separately so that they could get themselves going with their decision making and their growing crops and moving back to their land and their irrigation and their relationship with the municipality, all those things that they had to do. They could just focus on that rather than also having to do marketing processing just because it would have been too much all at once.
Yes.
I think in this case, but I'm not saying you have to have a social enterprise and not a co-op to do those things, but it is interesting that it is an interesting model. It's kind of like it's pretty new, I would say. It's a social enterprise in the sense that it's a profit-making enterprise, but all the money goes back into the companies or out to, the co-op itself. I mean, to the local. It would go to, eventually, if they were making money, it would go to the co-op members, right?
We're just about out of time, and I just had two questions. That's all right. No, it's a complicated situation, as you say. Every environment is different, and that's one of the challenges of community-based development in these areas is that we need to be able to adapt to these situations. That's one of the strengths of the co-op model, is it's so versatile.
Yeah, it's more about getting inspired by each other than replicating, perhaps.
That's right.
And there was one question I just wanted to give Sherry a chance to reply to. I think she did briefly over the chat box, but with respect to the hiring practices, there was a question around people with disabilities, but you did mention that the Arctic co-ops are the biggest private sector employer of Aboriginal peoples in the north, Inuit and First Nations. Are there any, is that just a coincidence, or are there specific hiring practices in place among the co-ops?
Well, the vast majority of residents in communities are Inuit, Dene, or Métis, or like Inuit, First Nations, Métis. So, I mean, that is our, our base of hiring from. So, I mean, we certainly have non-Aboriginal employees in the co-op system, particularly at the management level. So that's one of the areas that we focus our training on, is training Aboriginal people to be able to fulfill the management positions in the whole system. So one of the questions was about hiring people with disabilities, and certainly the co-ops, we've received phone calls, particularly from the schools that have individuals with special needs, and have requested the co-op if the co-op would, provide them with a work experience, and so the co-ops are certainly receptive to supporting all residents of their communities. And then if there is a position that an individual is able to fill and be successful in, then the co-op certainly will really hire all residents in their communities.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that's clearly one of the advantages of many co-ops, of being rooted in their communities. They can be sometimes more sensitive to community needs. We're unfortunately out of time for the formal session of the webinar, so I'm going to wrap up this portion here to start by saying that when we say co-ops are the Swiss Army knife of community economies, I think what we really mean is that they offer a way for people to work together to meet their needs, whatever the needs are, as Gretchen and Lynn were just saying. They can bring together a wide range of assets in the communities to create services from birthing centers to funeral services. You can find co-ops in every part of the world doing just about anything based on democratic principles and responding to needs rather than pursuing profit maximization. So as the examples we heard today show, co-ops are businesses. They have the same needs of economic diversification, a market base, planning, and marketing as other businesses, but they're working in places where the private sector or market economies are often absent. And as Arctic co-ops has demonstrated over the long haul, they can make a huge difference in people's lives, but it takes a lot of hard work, time, and effort. Ultimately, as research has shown, co-ops can be more resilient than traditional small and medium enterprises and can fill vital gaps where traditional economic approaches fail. So we have lots of reasons to celebrate in this year, International Year of Co-ops. There's a slide here with a bit more information, and I'll say that you should have just received an email about 10 minutes ago with a link to a 1-minute evaluation survey. If you can take a minute, really seriously, it should just take 1 minute. Open that email, click on the link, and fill it out quickly. Your feedback is very important to us. It's important because we're going to be doing more webinars like this one. If you have suggestions for other topics, we'll include a link in the final email we'll send you probably tomorrow with the link to this, the recording of this session that you can share with others if you think they would benefit from hearing it, and also a link to register for other upcoming sessions. The next session we're organizing is going to be on October 16th, and we'll be looking at developing resilient communities with CCEDNet founding member Mike Lewis, drawing on his new book, The Resilience Imperative. So thanks again to Jason, Gretchen, and Sherry for having shared so much information on the very encouraging and inspiring examples of the impacts of co-ops in the four corners of the world, all over the world. And thank you to the participants who joined us for the session. There still seems to be a bit of activity in the chat room, so the formal portion of the webinar will end here, but we'll leave the chat room open for a while so people can continue sharing information, ideas, and questions. Thanks to everyone again for joining us, and have a terrific day.